This is Thrashers, Slashers, and the Road to Wrestlemania, a new show on the Stiff Shots Podcast Network where I'll take the time during this pandemic lockdown to catch up with a friend each week to discuss an album, a movie, and a Wrestlemania, along with some tangents and ranting on the way. What's up, freaks? I'm Rick Jimenez, working but washed up musician from Extinction AD and This Is Hell, No Frills personal trainer from Ironheart Training, and pro wrestling podcast moron from the Stiff Shots Podcast. We're broadcasting from good old Huntington, New York. And today we have my best friend in the entire world, John Moore. You may know John from references on the Stiff Shot Podcast with all of the toy playing we did in the 80s and the 90s. Here we are on the first episode of Thrashers, Slashers, and the Road to WrestleMania. What's up, man?
What's up, Rick? Thanks for having me, man. Nicely part of the debut episode. The best part of anyone's career is the debut, right? Only like the demo. Unless
you're Rocky Maivia at Survivor Series 96, which we were in attendance at Madison Square Garden.
We absolutely were.
Like I said, I've spoke about you essentially every episode of the Stiff Shots Pod, but here we are. This is all about you and your opinions on movies, music, and WrestleMania. But first off, do you remember how we met?
Yeah, it's funny because we're talking about 85, right? So that's pretty much when WrestleMania happened before we met. Like, that's probably the last major event in recorded human history before you and I started hanging out. And it's funny because talking about the different years we had to choose from, like, oh, Star Wars was done by then, before. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they picked up again with the prequels. I'm like, oh, that's kind of the launching point for, you know, our epic friendship, you know, the picnic table and playing Star Wars toys. And, you know, before wrestling toys, there was Star Wars, no matter, even though I don't really like to admit that now. You know, always want to focus on the Hasbros, you know, for life. But the Kenner Star Wars was first. And just thinking back to the fact that we were doing that and kindergarten was school. And we can pretty much talk about every single year about wrestling, movies, toys from that point until 2020 is something else.
You know, it's really crazy because I think about how long we've known each other and how long, you know, essentially since day one, been best friends. But like you were saying, our friendship predates our wrestling hysteria.
Yeah, fandom, yeah.
And you said Star Wars. It even predates that because I don't know if I'm misremembering, but in my brain, the way that we met is that we wound up sitting next to each other on the school bus, the first day of school, going to kindergarten, and we started talking about Transformers, and we drew a picture of Optimus Prime together, where
yes.
You drew his head and I drew his body.
The teamwork right there from the very beginning. Growing
up, you and I always had this relationship of that nature. Like when we played video games, we more often than not played co-op. And people like turn their noses up at that and like, oh, that's
switching innings in sports talk baseball.
Yeah, doing that, playing on the same team in hockey, playing tag team in wrestling. Mm-hmm. So even that, you know, we shared our toy wrestling fed.
Yep, co-booked, cooperated.
The TWF.
Yep. The Toy Wrestling Federation.
The Toy Wrestling Federation. Really,
the greatest fig fed of all time.
Yeah, really original.
But, you know, it's funny that you mention that because, you know, aside from being grateful to have a best friend at all, you know, that's not to mention one that I'm no longer than my own brother. And before anything of real consequence happened in my life, just forming that collaborative nature. You know, it's funny when you mention, you know, drawing a head and then someone else drawing the body. That's kind of, you know, how we write songs together. You know, it's kind of like the head and the body separate, but always working together. You know, it's kind of how we thought about like co-booking the Fig Fed, writing songs, like, you know, just direction of a band, you know, in terms of like the business side of things and whatever the case may be. And that collaborative nature is something that's a huge part of my life outside of, you know, music and arts and creativity. Because, you know, even with my day job, you know, I'm helping other people find jobs and being that bridge, you know, being part of the team is something that, although, you know, I feel like in many cases I can be an A-type, you know, just being able to let someone else take the wheel. I think that's a huge, you know, learning experience that not everybody gets. So I'm super, super grateful for that always.
Well, maybe I'll get to that point where I don't have to be in control of everything. I don't know, man. Maybe you're the bar because every band I've been in since the beginning of bands, which we were in our first bands together also. I always have the best relationship with the bass player, and that will be a recurring theme of this show for at least the first the first month and a half. But we'll get into this. But we played in many bands together. First band ever, Shogun Decapitators, Subterfuge, IQless, This Is Hell. List goes on and on.
The Sentence, baby. The Sentence, baby.
So the year we're talking about, 1985. So first off, let's go through a couple of things going on in 1985 that might be relevant to us. Super Bowl 19, the 49ers beat the Dolphins. Joe Montana versus Dan Marino. Totally cool. Puts us right in the era that we're in. Reagan was sworn in for his second term, which makes sure that we had another 4 years of great American punk and hardcore.
I always think of DRI when I hear that name, and I can't think about anything else.
Reaganomics killing you, Reaganomics killing me. We Are the World was recorded. You remember that video?
Yes, I was going to say that's all I remember is the melody and the video.
You know what? Great song. Stevie Wonder, Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson's glove was shinier than ever that day. New Coke was released April 23rd, 1985. You and I worked at King Cullen together, and I never ran into this person, but you did apparently. How often would one certain person come up to you and ask for Crystal Pepsi?
Oh, man. Crystal Clear Pepsi, years after it had been discontinued. Oh, man, if we're not exaggerating, legitimately, probably once every, week, 2 weeks.
1999, grown man asking for Crystal Pepsi, I think had a lifespan of probably a year.
One summer.
Yeah. So New Coke was released in 1985, and it lasted all of 3 months, and they went back to just plain old Coke.
Yeah, Coke Classic.
So much of our friendship and our relationship started around baseball. 1985, Pete Rose becomes the all-time hit leader with 4,192 hits on September 11th.
Wow.
So that's what we really should remember, because Pete Rose, American treasure.
WWE Hall of Famer, right? But not MLB Hall of Famer?
Yeah,
still?
well, I guess one counts more than the other.
Oh, for sure.
I have great recollection and memories of the first United States Nintendo. Duck Hunt, Super Mario Brothers.
Ice hockey.
Hockey.
Pro wrestling, that first game with the lizard man or creature from the Black Lagoon that was in that game, remember?
Oh, you mean Amazon, who was
yes.
He was eliminated in the first round of the Stiff Shots Podcast Corona Mania Championship. I couldn't believe it, which is hilarious that I love Amazon the wrestler because I despise Amazon the company. Michael Jordan premieres the first Air Jordans during a slam dunk contest. Man, the world is going crazy right now over Michael Jordan, and they should, and hopefully the world will go crazy over Michael Jordan forever.
You watched that documentary?
I started it, but I didn't finish it because there's too much wrestling to watch.
Yeah.
I'll get around to it. I will get around to it because the first 2 episodes that I saw are...
Remember just how much the Bulls were a thing? It was like the Bulls and Hulkamania around then, like an institution.
Absolutely. 80s and 90s American institution. And last but not least, probably your favorite part of 85 is the Oilers beating the Flyers in the Stanley Cup.
Yeah. That was a dynasty. Gretzky, Messier, Fuhrer, Curry. Great team.
Those names that you just mentioned, same thing. Gretzky is Jordan level. Messier is Pippen level.
Oh, he's better than Pippen because he won the cup in New York, too. So he captained another team to win the championship. More Stanley Cups than Gretzky. And then Paul Coffey, too. That team was stacked. And the funny thing is, the Oilers, again, had a long period of irrelevancy between then and, recently when they started getting better again.
Messier and Gretzky and Coffey all left the team soon after, right?
Gretzky was there for a little while longer, until that epic trade to the Kings. Messier was there for even longer with Edmonton, won another cup after Gretzky got traded, and he was with New York until, 92, 93 when he came over to the Rangers, and Coffey made the rounds after that team, but he was top form then. It's funny, most of that team, the 85 team, wound up on the 94 Rangers team that won the cup.
Yeah.
They kind of scouted that team, and it's true, once you have a bunch of guys that know how to win together, even if it's almost a decade later, you can recreate that success under the right system, So
before we get into it, what are you up to now?
quite a bit. Working, recruiting for Allstate, helping people land jobs. That's really probably the only thing that I could stand to do as a day job is feel like I actually have some kind of purpose. And, especially during a time like now where a lot of people are getting laid off, they're looking for new employment opportunities. Being a recruiter is like a level of gratification that I never got from a day job, even being a teacher for so many years. So doing that, writing music cues for mostly reality TV shows. I'm able to keep that creative juice flowing. Keep the dream alive, so to speak, even though it's a little bit smaller in scope, but, working with some great music libraries and trying to give them as many tracks as I can, so they can place them and hopefully generate, a little bit of side income. Moonlight as a musician at this point, I think is a good balance for me. Trying to stretch out a little bit in terms of genre, after playing hardcore for so many years and having all these other musical interests, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, because both of us definitely, kind of feed into that, when given the chance, to be able to explore it, on, even if it's a part-time basis, is something that I never really thought I would sink my teeth into. But thanks to the ability to record at home, learn some software and be able to be a complete outsider in a different industry like music licensing and kind of break through the door just through sheer will and cold emailing and then submitting and things like that you could never really do, in other areas of the music industry. I feel like that world has been good to me. So I want to try to maintain that as best I can. And aside from that, just, waiting, first child, going to be a dad, which is pretty interesting. Never thought that, this would happen. It's been quite an interesting year, moving into a new place and settling down and getting married and, having this kid is going to be a new adventure for me too. So all of that on top of this shelter in place, dealing with the COVID pandemic, it's a matter of really balancing things and taking it one day at a time. But I feel like now I'm kind of weathering the storm well, and I think it's due to previous life experiences and just trying to just focus on the task at hand, really.
I love that you're doing the cues. I remember when you first started doing that, I was like, do you really think that that's going to be worth it? Like, do you think this is a good direction to go? You really want to stop playing in bands, yada, yada? And it was like, yes, this is what I want to do. I want to, like you said, you could go in other genres. You could do it all and, still live the regular life to pay bills because we live in America and everything is dominated by how much money you could make. So you could just give it to somebody who doesn't deserve it. So you do that as well as something that's fulfilling. And we come from punk and hardcore and metal, and usually guys like us, we do a band, and when the band's over, we complain about it for the rest of our lives and then just find some job we dislike and complain about that for the rest of our lives and do nothing. So that's not what you're doing, and it's the best. All right, before we get into the slashing, the thrashing, and the road to Wrestlemania, this week's sponsor is Good Fight Music. Good Fight Music is one of the leading record labels in heavy music with such bands as The Chariot, End, Crypto Dira, Disembodied, Extinction AD, Cancer Bats, and more. Head over to goodfightmusic.com and pick up t-shirts, records, hoodies, and all sorts of goodies while they continue to ship out merchandise during the COVID-19 pandemic with a limited but dedicated staff directly supporting your favorite artists in a time they need the most. Goodfightmusic.com. The year is 1985, and we're starting off with The Breakfast Club, a staple of the 80s and just cinema now. Before we get into that, I'm going to down a little bit of the Red Bull.
Yeah, I'm drinking seltzer too, so that...
So Breakfast Club, how come you chose this one?
Well, for me, it was funny because there are movies like this and Ferris Bueller and, just the John Hughes collection that have now become just they're almost classic movies now. Remember TNN classic movies, that's how they are now. And we were so young, when they came out and when we actually were coming of age and we understood what they were all about, these are current, just to think about them as being retro is mind blowing to me. And when I think about that, this is always the first one that comes to mind. I think because, as you mentioned before, it's all about storytelling. And even though the 80s, the era of excess, there's just so much great content that came out, and movies really took a huge step in terms of just technology and just practical effects. But this movie was just all about the story and the characterization. And I feel like it was something that everybody could relate to. And when you think about themes, this movie really kind of illustrated to me what a goal for a filmmaker could be, and also the best way to execute it. Because you go in thinking you understand all the characters, but it's just based on your preconceived notion of the stereotype of who they're supposed to be. And then by the end, you think, oh, like there's a little bit of me in every one of these characters. So, when that whole kind of image comes into focus, and like that's what John Hughes was going for here. Like, don't judge the book by its cover. Don't think that the person that's the athlete doesn't have feelings, or the fact that the basket case can't say anything smart, or whatever the case may be. Like, it just, for me, that was a way I looked at being I don't know, I guess a preteen and then into my teens. Like, oh, like, don't look at this person and judge them. And I feel like it's funny to learn that lesson through a movie, especially a movie that's a comedy. But I got a lot out of this movie, so I can still watch it now. Definitely holds up. Some of the dialogue is a little cringe-worthy when you think about it now in 2020.
Oh my God, I was gonna say that a lot of this movie holds up great, but a little bit, but an important little bit just ages so terribly. I could not believe, and I don't know why I couldn't believe it. It was the 80s.
Right.
I could not believe some of the dialogue in this. It's not even us looking for things to pick on. It's straight up the evolution of the human brain, realizing that some things are just like not cool, man. Oh my God. So I always go into watching 80s movies expecting that. And for some reason, Sporto just yelling the F word on this like PG-13 movie. I could not believe it.
Yeah. Explicit drug use in a PG-13 movie.
Yeah, I'm all about that. I don't.
Just so funny.
You and I never did drugs. Don't do drugs still. But hey, man, what would Adam Palazzotto be if you couldn't smoke weed in high school?
Exactly. Dodging Chinese stars out there somewhere.
So, even the opening scene of this movie, the cars that they show up in are so typical of every 80s stereotype. You know what else? When I watched this movie, this is exactly what I thought high school was for my sisters when I was younger than, both my sisters, obviously, when they were in high school. And it was the 80s. So maybe it was exactly what it was. But, if you know us from childhood, you'll understand this reference. If you don't, that's totally fine. Do you just think John Bender is Adam Palazzotto?
Adam and Ross Lito. And
Adam Palazzotto in our school he wasn't, the stoner. He wasn't even really much of a stoner, but he was your typical young metal troublemaker.
And Nick Schuring, because he wore the trench coat.
And Nick Schuring and Charlie Schmidt, who were in the band Black Mass, who I stole for this album title. So I have such an affection for John Bender because he reminds me of Adam Palazzotto, who is the one who our elementary school in the summer between 3rd and 4th grade, which I'm putting that on the internet now. But no one ever found out. I'm letting the world know, but in a good way, because I think it's glorious that he did that. Johnson, like the nerd, his name is Brian Johnson, like the singer of AC/DC. I never put that together before, and that is, so funny. To me, now, Johnson is the most interesting character, because as a kid, he was the one I was like, nerd. And now, he's the one I relate to the most. Not to mention, Anthony Michael Hall is just like, he is just such an unbelievable actor. He's a child, and he's just acting the shit out of this part.
Yeah. Absolutely. And he'll always be Brian to me. Like, I think all of them, just typecast in these roles for me. And I thought it was hilarious that Emilio Estevez, who was the jock, was also in the Mighty Ducks as the coach. So that was really funny. And Judd Nelson, coincidentally enough, interviewed for a part in Dan Tur's uncle's movie, the Little Hercules movie, also, which was supposed to star Hulk Hogan. And I actually met the Hulkster during the whole production. I got to meet Judd Nelson, got to meet Hulkster, got to meet Jack A from 227.
Oh my God.
During that whole thing. And I wish those memories were a little bit clearer. It's like 15 years ago. Now it's all just kind of a blur, but I'll just never forget sitting next to Judd Nelson. Like, oh, this is John Bender. And he's like an old guy now. And he was like very chill.
So cool. Just absolutely great. 80s staple.
And Molly Ringwald too. Like, no matter how many movies she's been in the 80s or otherwise, Claire is just who she is.
Man, every poor girl in the world who grew up in the 80s with the name Claire, because they're always getting the Claire is a fat girl name. We had one Claire in our high school, and she got it all the time. That's all I remember about that girl. But Bender's rants in this entire movie. Every single one has been sampled for a 90s punk record.
Oh, yeah. And then you have the Bouncing Souls cover of Don't You Forget About Me, which is probably, to me, one of those instances where the cover could be better than the original. I know it's like blasphemy to say that in any case, but I really love Bouncing Souls' version of that song. Even though Simple Minds is great, and it has that 80s sound, I think it works so well for what Bouncing Souls were doing at the time. They had these are the quotes from our favorite 80s movies, and then they had the cover of that song, and it's like kind of solidified that. And it's funny because I tie that band, even though I didn't hear them until high school. It just felt like, oh, I've been listening to this band for as long as I've listened to, I don't know, the Police and the Clash, which is so strange that in my head they just had that cemented just tenure, for fandom for me from the first time I heard them, because they used like those 80s tropes that I was, so used to having around from when I was a little kid.
Yeah. The soundtrack to this movie is pretty sick as it is.
Some of the cues are so good, like that mock 80s reggae that plays when smoking weed. It's got just like the 80s synth, and the drums don't even sound like the one drop at all. It's just so funny.
Right. Oh, the electro version of a heavy riff when Bender yells "fuck you" to the principal.
Oh man,
yeah. Classic character. You know who else I really, really changed my opinion on in this movie, on this watch, because I haven't seen this movie in quite some time. The janitor. Dude, that janitor is just the man.
Right, he gets it.
He gets it, man. He gets it. I always viewed the janitor, the way I view or used to view a janitor when we were kids. Just like, not like the peasant, but just, he's the janitor.
It comes around with the sawdust when someone pukes and is trying to get by.
He throws kitty litter on Chris Stein's puke.
Yeah.
But now, especially because I relate to the janitor so much, almost as much as Brian Johnson, he is the older guy who didn't want a he didn't want an office job. He's like, you know what? I'll do this job. I have other interests, and I take it as seriously as it is. It's a paycheck, but I don't like the teaching staff. I like some of the kids, and he is so nice to Brian, not because he thinks, Brian kicks ass, because he sees that Brian is this like disenfranchised nerd. So instead of like, oh, hey, like I want to just, be the dorky teacher that wants to be friends with the nerd, he's just like the guy who gets it, who's like, I'm going to befriend this guy. And of course, Brian's a little embarrassed when he says hi to him in front of, all the other degenerates. And he's not even offended by it because he gets it. And then the way he plays the principal later on.
Oh, drops knowledge on the principal.
The best. And he does the same thing to the kids after Bender kind of clowns on him. And his whole entire response to that, and then pointing out that the clock is 15 minutes fast. Oh, it's so sick. Two more parts that I just want to talk about in the movie real quick that I just think are so sick. First of all, the prince... the prince...
Wait, wasn't it so funny that, like, the principal with the whole, not to cut you off, but mess with the bowl and get the horns thing, and then, like, our principals were so nice, like, Mr. Campese and, oh my God, who was
Mr.
the other?
Brill.
Who was the other? Yeah, Mr. Brill, like, they were the nicest guys. I remember, like, gearing up to be like, all right, principal's gonna come after us if we do this and that and the other thing. They were always just like, oh, you guys doing all right out here? Oh, you threw somebody down the hill? No big deal. It's all right.
Mr. Brill, would you like some jelly?
Yes. Like, I don't think I ever had a principal that even tried to come across as intimidating or as an SOB in any way. Like,
we did in middle school. I got in trouble quite a bit in middle school, and we had some shitty principals.
Who was our middle school principal?
I don't know, but I threw a stink bomb, which isn't really a bomb. But I got in trouble for throwing the stink bomb. The guy kept referring to it as an explosive. He's like, you could have blown off someone's arm. I was like, it's a stink bomb. It's a piece of plastic that you stomp on and it smells like farts. If you don't think that's funny, you suck.
Yeah, right? No, I was going to say, I feel like most people, even when we were in school, just got it. But this, principal in the Breakfast Club, he definitely would have been the kind of the guy to say, like, hey, you're going to blow somebody's arm off with a stink bomb.
He comes in and everyone's laughing at Bender. And he goes, what? You think he's bitching? And I think that's sick because Bender is bitching. How about Claire referring to Bender and his, I guess, out-of-school activities as heavy metal vomit parties? Man, that brings me back to our middle school and high school heavy metal vomit parties at Mosherville. Mosherville was that thing was a house. It was a house
in the woods.
in the middle of the woods where we would go at night with our metal and grunge friends, and they would drink beer and smoke weed, and we'd hang out with girls.
Listen to Marilyn Manson.
Oh, God. Well, Marilyn Manson would be on, but, you know.
Could you imagine building a house in the woods and leaving it there? Like how, like same thing with like getting bears in the ring for wrestling. Like how did they just construct a house? I think I was going to leave this here. So funny.
So who did you relate to most as a kid in this movie, and who do you relate to most now?
So that's kind of what I was alluding to before when I thought about this movie and why I would choose it. Because 85 was a great year for movies, especially, you know, being able to tie in Goonies and Cyndi Lauper to WrestleMania 1. I'm like, oh, it's a great connection. But I'm like, no, it's got to be Breakfast Club. All because of just the evolution of your thought process while you're watching it, you know. And I feel like you go in, and, you know, Anthony Michael Hall, you know, Brian's obviously for me who I would relate to. I think it's so funny because he's the one that writes the letter at the end of the movie. Like, that's so me. I'd be the one that would have to write the letter at the end before we leave. But I think just when you look at that, you look at Bender and, you know, heavy metal vomit parties and my constant love and involvement with that. And then, you know, you look at Emilio and just, you know, being an athlete, you know, my love of hockey and baseball and all that stuff. Like, I think that I relate to everybody on some level. Even Ali Sheedy, you know, like she just doesn't want to be bothered. But then once, you know, you kind of approach her and that wall comes down, and she's hilarious. Yeah. So, you know, I think that's where I'm at with this movie. How about you?
You know what? Growing up, I always thought I was Bender. I feel, you know, I'm with you. A little bit of everyone, but if I had to pick, it would be either Bender or Johnson. Because I love heavy metal, but I don't do weed. And, you know, sometimes I think I'm cool, but I know I'm just like a little scrawny dork. But if you don't want to be a scrawny dork, go to www.ironhawktrainingny.com and I will show you how to get gigantic biceps and a flat stomach. And you will not be like Johnson. You'll be a little bit more like Sporto. All right, so the album of 1985, the thrasher this week, Tears for Fears, Songs from the Big Chair, which was released 2 days after The Breakfast Club was released, February 17th.
And it really is a thrasher. Can't you imagine their name being written in like one of those like super metal logos? Like when there's nothing on the inside, there's a white outline, you can't really read it.
I want to hear real quick why you chose this record.
So for me, it's very fun to think back to if I was 25 in 85 as opposed to 15 and who I would be. Because, you know, there is tons of metal out there. You know, the punk rock thing had kind of died out a little bit, you know, between like 77 and like 79, you know, like was the height of all that, where I know I probably would have been into that. But I probably would have been into Tears for Fears then as much as I am now. The Police was pretty much done. Clash, pretty much done. And they took up that mantle for like that British pop. And it's so funny because I've always had an affinity for that. Like, you know, anything that comes out of the United Kingdom when it comes to the music around that time. And there's a lot of great music coming out around then in the mid 80s, you know, but I feel like of everything that I still listen to, like I still listen to this album on a regular basis. And if you think about it, there's been an 80s revival, you know, fashion, music and all that, just in terms of production styles and you know, how people are just like presenting themselves. But if the 80s is the best time for pop music and you look at everything from the 80s and what could be construed as a throwback if it came out now, you have to look at Head Over Heels, you have to look at Shout, and then most importantly, Everybody Wants to Rule the World. If the album was an EP with those 3 songs on it, it would be undefeated for me because you get the whole spectrum from, and what I like most about the 80s is that, you know, stuff kind of sounds happy, but then you dig a little deeper and there's like minor chords in there. And there's also like lyrics that tend to maybe be a little bit more misanthropic than you would think, you know, going in, you know, and these songs, those 3 especially exemplify that, you know, as an album beginning to end. Doesn't flow as much, you know, as like if you listen to other stuff from the 80s, like how Thriller is just like banger after banger, you know, from beginning to end, and how some other albums may have just more of a cohesive feel. I know this song was a collection of stuff that they wrote over many years, and you combine it with the fact that they're not so over the top like Flock of Seagull style or anything like that. They're just regular dudes that just love melody and are proficient at their instruments. Then that's me, to a T. So I feel like I could listen to this. I could go see them play, not have to feel like I'd have to tease my hair or, wear acid wash jeans or anything like that, and just go and be like, yeah, this rules. This makes me feel good. And it's also a little deeper than just like, any kind of bubblegum pop, So that's where I stand on this. And for me, in terms of just solid songwriting, and they work in the videos and how just kind of, all right, like they're not like wacko, anything crazy, but they're a little bit, oh, what? That was interesting. So, I just love the way that they go about doing things. And the fact that they're still playing together. They didn't play together for many years, but, they're still a band today. Like, that freaking rules to me.
Well, I cannot wait to talk about this record. But first, I'm going to actually disagree with you. And I was surprised that I thought this as well. I thought this record, especially for the genre that it is and the style that it is, was such a great album, not just song by song. And to be perfectly honest, I thought I had never listened to this full record start to finish, and listening to it for the first time, hearing every single song start to finish in context and in perfect order and the sequencing, I was like, wow, this is an album.
So here, quick rebuttal though. So I understand what you're saying in terms of thinking about it as a cohesive album. I think just where we may differ is that for me, especially now, and when I'm writing, like, this is my shit, So, like, I feel like the end chorus to Shout, like, that could play on a continuous loop for me for 24 hours. I wouldn't get sick of it. Like, the way that the vocal line lines up, like, it could just, it's so weird. It gets you in, like, a trance. And it, like, for me, just the fact that anything comes after it, I'm like, all right, it's just, you're not at that peak anymore, So same thing with Everybody Wants to Rule the World. I feel like the fact that they mix in guitars so well with synths, where in the 80s, bands were going in one direction drastically or the other. The fact that that cool delay guitar riff and then the synths come in and you're like, all right, like, that's how it's done. Like, you marry it, in that way that nothing is really stepping on anything else. And the fact that their vocals, like, the accent's not so pronounced that you kind of, it's a turnoff, it just sits so well in the mix. And then when you get into Head Over Heels too, it's like, that's another song that anything coming after that, even though Listen is a great song for a closer, I don't want it to end. So that's maybe why we think differently about it.
I think it's funny that you said that the end of Shout, you could go on and on and you wouldn't mind. Because I have in my notes when I was listening to this the last time, there's so many of these songs, but especially the bangers that, and I never do this, but the song ends and I just play it again.
Yeah, 6 minutes and 32 seconds.
And you want to hear it again.
That's what's crazy. Everybody Wants to Rule the World. The fact that it kind of changes feels, but it's still so melodic. And that chorus, to me, just takes the song to a whole nother level. I think it's one of the best choruses ever written in a pop song. So, anything that's going to follow it kind of brings you down a little bit, because it would be impossible to maintain that kind of momentum.
Yeah, I'm with you for sure. Well, the record starts out with Shout, which is just, come on, unreal banger. Like I said, it's so hard to listen to this song just once.
And here's the thing real quick. What's funny is that this album came out after they released Mad World. Could you imagine if Mad World was on, I can't even say that, Mad World was on this album too?
Yeah.
Unreal. And I know that Donnie Darko is kind of what brought that song back to popularity, kind of like Wayne's World with Bohemian Rhapsody, But I always forget about that song and that it's not on this record. But
yeah, like you said, the layering and the variation on what is essentially a simple song, but it's not. This song is straight up godlike. And those voices, it's insane. How somebody even has that timbre to their voice.
Right.
And this is crazy. This is like, of course, we all listen to different types of things, but this is coming from I like metal, punk, and hardcore. I can listen to the same 5-10 Metallica albums for the rest of my life. And I'm saying Shout by Tears for Fears is a god level song. Second song, Working Hour. Man, this song sounds like nighttime in the 80s. Mm-hmm. That fucking saxophone. This is what I imagine Allie from Breakfast Club listens to on her Walkman when she's walking through the streets of Chicago at night.
Exactly. Whether she's getting ready to go out, like putting her makeup on, or she's actually, at the nightclub or walking, that the song works in all those different scenarios. And that's the thing. I feel like everything now is so specific time, specific place, where this song just is timeless from the first time you hear it. Like, this song could have come out, the way it's played, could have come out even earlier than 85. This could have been like a late 70s, early 80s, especially with how they've been using the technology. And it could come out now, and you really wouldn't, like, this could be a weekend song, and you'd be like, okay, there are synths there, but there's guitar too. And the bass is prominent, which is always a big thing for me. If I can't hear the bass, it's hard for me to really get into anything. So the groove is there too. And the fact that they were able to be as popular as they were with this sound and be able to find success, on, more than one continent in 85, it's tremendous.
Everybody wants to rule the world. Oh my God. This song, first off, just reminds me of childhood and brings a smile to my face, which is, that never happens. I'm always mad at this, that, or the other thing. This also reminds me, not the video specifically, but in 85, 86, every so often my mom would go to work and she'd drop me off at her friend's house to watch me. And she had two other kids who were both boys. And we'd watch MTV and, imitate what's going on in the video. Whenever this song came on, I would always be like, all right, I'm going to be that guy. And the one kid would be like, you can't be him. I'm going to be him. So I'd be like, I'm going to be the other guy. And the other kid's like, well, I'm him. So as much as this makes me smile about childhood, it always reminds me of being bullied by these two kids. And maybe that's why I turned into such a prick throughout the late 80s and early 90s.
You're a product of your environment. And how about cool guitar solo in a pop song in the mid 80s?
Well, I mean, that's another factor, or in my opinion, that was just popular music up until the past 10, 15 years. That, like, no matter what the song is, there's still going to be a guitar in there somewhere. And maybe that's why I'm so mad at all these other musicians and songs and shit. Put a guitar in everything. You don't have a guitar in it? Fuck off.
Yeah, I've been doing that with my cues. Like, even if it's mostly synth-based, I have to have a guitar and a live bass in there. And I know a lot of guys that are writing music for film and television are just going the opposite direction. They're just doing completely in-the-box stuff. And, and this is kind of what shaped my idea of what catchy music and music that can sit well in a scene but also be listened to and be fun and enjoyable, like where it should be. And it's got to be that hybrid of organic instrumentation. And to me, just electronics, for me, because working by myself, that's the only option. And now I've really kind of fallen in love with it after a few years. So, with Everybody Wants to Rule the World, it's one of those songs that no matter when it comes on, I'm not changing it, and they're, no matter what, even some of my favorite bands, from the 80s, 90s, 2000s, like there might be times where I'm not in the mood for it, but this song, just the way it moves, there's different feels to it, different rhythms, and just the way that everything is presented. It's just like, all right, this is a pop song, unabashed, but it's not cheesy,
And there's a message for all you up-and-coming musicians. Don't be a nerd and get a guitar. If you want to be a real sick bastard, get one with a double locking system, because fixed bridges, better than nothing, but barely. Next, we have Mother's Talk. Man, this song is peak 80s dance pop. This song probably got the Hairspray chicks nuts at the Great Hollow School Dance in 85.
And all the musical breaks in these, like, they're not afraid to say, okay, this is a pop song, but we're not going to have vocals here. Mm-hmm. I feel like now everyone's so vocals got to be everywhere, layering hundreds of different harmonies and stuff. And they're just not afraid to be like, hey, we play bass, guitar, drums, and keys, and we're just going to let it ride. And to me, that rules.
Yeah, that is something that I do like. I believe, I don't know about you, this song first reminds me of Charlie Brown Christmas. And then as it goes on, it reminds me of Mama Said, the kind of country Metallica song from Load.
Remember the Load contest? Mother Load?
Oh, the Mother Load contest. I have that on a blue VHS Polaroid cassette that I kept when I made the great purge last year of my VHS cassettes. I kept some of them.
Didn't they play in somebody's house?
Yeah. Some dude won the contest. They came and played in his living room. They played basketball with him. He won a truck. He won a bunch of guitars. If you're listening to this, go to YouTube and search MTV Metallica Motherload Contest.
I thought you were going to say, if the guy that won is listening, then he needs to reach out to us.
Oh, if the guy that won is listening, man. I think he was from Evansville, Indiana, which is where Don Mattingly is from.
Oh, hell yeah.
Broken. So, like I said, a lot of these songs I'd never heard because I never listened to the whole record. So it uses the same keyboard melody and lyrics as Head Over Heels, which is nuts to me on first listen. I'm like, wait a minute, what? And then, in my opinion, showing that the band is a pop machine but has that album mentality just raises my opinion of the band so much. And that doesn't happen now with pop even in the slightest bit, in my opinion, because Head Over Heels is the next record. And you know, I love wrestling and I love movies and I love music, and it all comes to storytelling. You know, I love when people can tell a story in music. I love people can tell a story through a wrestling match. And not that every album needs to be a concept album, but if you could tell a story, and we were talking about it before, we did this with Misfortunes, the second This Is Hell record, using similar musical motifs. So a song goes one right into another, it tells a story. I've been obsessed with Queensryche, Operation Mindcrime for as long as the record has been around. So realizing that Tears for Fears did this in 85 and they have essentially a transition song going into what arguably could be their biggest song ever just blew my mind. So Head Over Heels is next, and dude, I can't put into words how sick this song is. And maybe it's because I was listening to the remaster or the Red Bull that I was on or the Red Bull that I'm on now. Or the stereo that I was listening to it on, or the fact that the sun came out for the first time in 12 months in New York.
Yeah, exactly.
But this song had never sounded so good and huge as when I listened to it last. Dude, the chorus is just a fucking monster. I turned this song up so loud that I was embarrassed. I was alone listening to this, blasting it, and I was embarrassed. The la-las, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe the best use of la-las or na-nas or whatever in the history of humankind. This song straight up makes me want to do a band like this. I never will do it because I'll be a complete failure, but holy fuck, man. I'm not saying this for certain, but this song could arguably be on the Mount Rushmore of music.
I agree. I'm a big sucker for any type of vocal ad-lib. I love hey. I love like a chorus that you can sing along with that is ad-libbed like that and doesn't have... I'm trying to remember what it's called. It's like, man, it's not...
Make something up.
Just that sick stuff. But yeah, like whenever you go into haze or hose or anything like that, and the fact that this is la and everyone can sing along to it, I think this might be the best example of that. And I firmly believe that people of our generation that have that stuck in their head as a way to not only just get around writing lyrics, but just using it as an effective tool, probably have, head over heels just endlessly in their head and just are influenced by it, because I think that's the greatest example of that ever.
And the album closer, listen. So I didn't know that this was the closer when I was listening to it. So my opinion of it kind of changed because I was into, like I said, what I was getting the album feel. And now this song, to me, is a bit of a long outro, which doesn't really end on the strongest note. But man, with all those bangers before, who fucking cares?
Yeah, it's kind of like a ride out. Chill. It's kind of easing out of the album.
Amazing album that now that I know that it's such an album, not just a couple of pop songs, it's something that has been in strong rotation with me.
Nice. Yeah, guitar tones are great on it too. Like not too much chorus, but enough that it sounds like the 80s.
It certainly does.
Love it. You can still find like versions of them playing these songs like within the last couple of years, and they can still sing and they're still tight and all that. Because if that wasn't the case, I'd be like, I go back to listen to the album and it ruins it for me, even if the songs are great. But the fact that they still sound good, it's killer. Last thing on Songs from the Big Chair, when I realized that the album title was referring to like sitting on a psychiatrist's couch, I thought that was really funny because I've always found these songs to be very therapeutic, not really because of the words necessarily, but just because of how music, makes you feel, and just how it's very energetic and the tempos are, mid, but still kind of on the upper end, but it's still very relaxing in an upbeat kind of way. And then you combine that with the fact that I feel very lucky that none of these songs were ruined for me throughout my life by anyone or anything or any experience. So the fact that, I heard these songs probably for the first time when I was 5 years old, and I'm about to be 40, and I still can listen to them. It's a great thing.
That is great. That is rare.
And rare, yes, absolutely rare.
We are now on the road to WrestleMania. March 31st, 1985, Madison Square Garden. The LJN figures were new. Hulk Hogan's Rockin' Wrestling cartoon was on.
It was like a year into Hulkamania, right? About?
We're just over a year into the WWF Hulkamania. January 84, Hogan defeat of Iron Sheik to win the WWF title. I had seen this for the first time in 1990, going to the video store and saying, oh, finally I could watch WrestleMania 1. And it's crazy because it was only 5 years prior, but at the time it seemed like it was so old.
Right, a big clamshell case, right?
Yeah. And you think back now, we just watched WrestleMania 36. I couldn't imagine watching WrestleMania 31 and feeling like it's this ancient
a long
artifact.
time ago. Yeah.
I wanted to watch this on VHS, but I didn't. I watched it on the network. So the show starts off, and right away I'm a little bummed because it's starting off with the fake music, not the original Coliseum video release music. Mm-hmm. But that's neither here nor there. That's just my
Coliseum video. That's so funny. I think that's probably wiped from the record books, the whole existence of that brand.
Oh, dude, there's a whole Coliseum video section on the network.
Right. But I mean, in terms of the fact that they're not using that for any releases, and I think in time it'll probably be phased out. But I remember that was the coolest emblem, because even beyond it all being WWF, just the fact that they made home videos, so you could watch all this stuff over and over again was great.
Jesse and Gorilla, my personal favorite commentary team.
Oh, definitely mine too, without a doubt.
And I guess that's a product of our time. Yeah,
and I think it's funny that so many legends, besides from being WrestleMania 1, but cementing their status here. And you wonder now, as an older person, is it because they were involved, or were they really just that good? But the career extension beyond WrestleMania 1 of Howard Finkel and Mean Gene and Gorilla and Jesse, it's all right. I guess they had the right people on board to make this happen, because, it was a big gamble, to have this show. And the fact that they had that talent on board to support it and to really give it their best, and the fact that they were able to last well beyond this, I think that's a testament to this being the right place at the right time and the right event.
Mean Gene sing the national anthem. It sucks and it rules.
Hinklefest?
It is as Hinklefest as it gets. The first match, Tito Santana versus the Executioner. Terrible interviews to open up the show, which also are great because it's 1985. Everything's low budget. It doesn't matter that they're terrible. They're great. The Executioner, Buddy Rose.
I had no idea that was him until this most recent time that I watched it, and then finding out about the meaning behind the blowaway diet and how I never put two and two together when I was young, because I was 8-9 years old. Now that will be funny for the rest of my life.
Buddy Rose historically loves to sniff white narcotics. For 1985, and especially without the lore already of WrestleMania, I thought this was a really good opener. I don't know if the crowd is canned, but man, huge pop for the figure four. It's insane. But man, it's interesting. WrestleMania meant this wrestling show. It didn't mean what WrestleMania means to us now. It's just a product of the time that even with WrestleMania, they waited for a house show to blow off the feud that was going on between Tito Santana and Greg Valentine. And they didn't do that for this show. I just thought that was pretty interesting. But man, Tito Santana is a staple of early WWF and our childhood.
Right. Oh, Tito's the best. I love the Matador too. I love Tito in every incarnation. I love Strike Force, Girls and Calls, all the best. I feel like I missed out on his Intercontinental title reign. I feel like if I was a fan of wrestling at that time, he may have been my favorite guy in the whole Fed. Arriba. Let me ask you a question. Opening match of WrestleMania always has a certain charm, especially like the first batch of what I remember watching, live, like 5, 6, 7. Does the pre-show in any way kill that for you?
The pre-show kills it for me a little bit now because the pre-show is a lot. Well, yeah, so I guess pre-show, not a dark match. Yes, it does a little bit, not totally, but it does a little bit. WrestleMania 35, we were there, 2 hours of pre-show and 3 matches. One of those matches was Hawkins and Ryder versus the Revival, who I was just super invested in that. And that was the last match of the pre-show. So by hour 2, the main show was starting, and I was already exhausted. Now, thankfully, Rollins and Lesnar opened up the show, and I was right back there. So when I go back and watch WrestleMania 35, because I was invested in the Majors match, I'm going to watch that match. Other WrestleManias, I'm not necessarily going to go back and watch the pre-show. So it kind of depends, but I don't think it would be a bad thing for there not to be matches on a pre-show if a pre-show was, essentially a half hour or 1 hour pre-show, and any matches are dark matches. But I do think it takes a little bit out of the luster of the opening match and getting the WrestleMania show started with a bang.
Right, and that's the thing. I feel like that is so important. And don't get me wrong, I know how hard these guys and girls work all year, and they want to get as many people on the show as possible. But the thing is, I feel like that's a double-edged sword, because that pre-show, like you said, it can be exhausting. Not everybody watches it, and I feel like they could use those matches in other areas, of the show, other days, and have them be a higher profile. I love watching the pre-show. I watch it every year, but I do feel like it takes away the bang of that first match. And it also, if they didn't have that option, maybe they would take more credence to the matches that they put on the main show.
I agree. We could go on and on about this. Yeah. We'll have to have you on the Stiff Shot show to talk about this, because Ryan and I we've had much discussion about this specific topic. So we'll have you there, and we'll dive right into that. Nice. Second match, King Kong Bundy, SD Jones. As a kid, this was lore because it was the shortest match ever. It happened at WrestleMania. King Kong Bundy looks like a dude I work with. I love King Kong Bundy. I don't love that guy. SD Jones, Special Delivery Jones, so I guess he is an essential worker. This short match was the thing of legends in the 80s and 90s because there wasn't unlimited matches. So when there was a squash like this, just like you, we regret not buying that LJN
yes,
SD
I thought you were going to say that's why this match was lore, because it was the guy from Toys R Us, the LJN, sitting there, and then one day he was gone, never to be seen again. And that probably goes for a lot of money on eBay.
The third match, Matt Bourne and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Matt Bourne, it's so interesting to me. For some reason, this didn't click the first, 20 times I watched this as a child. Matt Bourne, Big Josh from Great American Bash 1991, carrying around 2 bears on his back. Doink the Clown. Man, same thing. Terrible Matt Bourne interview. Mm-hmm. Just so bad that it's the best. But dude, Steamboat is just absolutely jacked here. I never think of him as a jacked guy. I think of him as a lean guy, and he is very lean. The finish with the crossbody, dude, that crossbody is absolutely beautiful.
I think of Steamboat as another one, like Tito, that if I was a fan at this time, I would have looked forward to this match. And the fact that it's like under 5 minutes long, and like you said, the disorganization of it all, I'd be like, oh, why is this guy wrestling in this match at this big card? But again, it's also in hindsight, because WrestleMania was setting the precedent. It was a huge show, but who knows what was going to come of it. It didn't necessarily become a destination, until the following year. So. And in a couple of years, Steamboat would probably fight in one of the more memorable WrestleMania matches ever. So, it's funny to go from Matt Bourne to Randy Savage in an IC title match within a few years. Shows how quickly, things can change and how someone can grow and get to the top of that card.
In all actuality, I think Matt Bourne got better and better and better. And in my opinion, he was at his peak during Doink. So, But what we have next is just so ridiculous. Brutus Beefcake and David Sammartino. Brutus spits into the mic during the promo before the match. He just has nothing to say, so he raspberries into the mic. Just, what the fuck? Poor David Sammartino just had no chance of ever getting out of Bruno Sammartino's shadow. And it also doesn't help that David is absolutely blown up sky high during this deal. David Sammartino looks like an ultra carnivorous version of Miami Vice. He's got that Sonny Crockett hairstyle, but he's all like 80s beefed up.
Mm-hmm. I had no idea about this. I had no idea that David Sammartino was ever a wrestler. I remember watching WrestleMania 1 multiple times as a kid. Do not remember ever watching this match.
But Brutus Beefcake, one of the biggest star faces of the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah, you were in for Halloween in 4th grade?
91. In 90, I was Don Mattingly. We got rained on as your mom followed us around in the car. We were trick-or-treating. Yeah. But, dude, in my opinion, miserable heel. The Disciple.
Booty Man.
The Butcher. All these things.
Yeah, it's very funny. Like, he had no personality as a heel in everything that I've seen. And then as soon as he turned face and they gave him those clippers, the whole world kind of opened up for him.
This match was cut down significantly time-wise for the VHS And I think that that's okay. I kind of wish it was cut down significantly time-wise for the network's
Maybe that's why I always missed it.
There's a reason why they cut it down. But it ends when Bruno comes into the ring. He has a sweater on. He's kicking ass. It's hilarious, exemplifying dad strength. Junkyard Dog challenging for the Intercontinental title against Greg Valentine. JYD on the network version is coming in with Grab Them Cakes.
I just watched the Saturday night's main event that takes place Mother's Day. JYD comes out with his mom and brings her into the ring. Another one. I know I'm repeating myself, but just so many guys at this event. I wish I could have seen more of their matches when I first got into wrestling.
There's a reason why WWF was king in the mid-'80s, and it's because they had all of this stellar talent, both babyface and heel. Speaking of that, here's Greg Valentine. It straight up is his last run as a top singles competitor. This reminded me of how good Greg Valentine is. The Intercontinental title, he has the first belt, and dude, that belt is just crazy looking. Such a throwback. Him doing his version of the Flair face bump.
Yep.
So house rocking, man.
Right. I think this may have been the first JYD match that I ever saw. Unfortunately, like the history of the IC title spoiled the match for me, because I knew that Greg had held the belt, but that JYD never did. So I knew how it was going to end up. But just watching this live, I could only imagine what it felt like being like, man, this JYD that rules is going to win the belt. I don't think too many kids our age probably would have been huge Greg Valentine fans. I remember my first exposure to him was his feud with Rugged Ronnie Garvin. And just remember thinking, why are either one of these guys on my television set right now? And it's funny because you mentioned Brutus before. And my first exposure to him, I remember, was watching Saturday Morning Wrestling Challenge. And it was Outlaw Ron Bass taking the spur to his head and the giant red X. So, all these formative moments that happened. So for me to go back and watch this match with Junkyard Dog thinking, oh man, if only I could have been watching this live thinking he's going to win the IC belt. What a reign it would have been. He would have been a great champ.
So next we have the USA Express defending their World Tag Team titles against Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov. This segment starts off with the pre-match promo, and Captain Lou Albano is doing the interview with a fucking beer in his hand.
Yep.
Chris, I'm going to drink a beer.
Oh. Now, we could do a whole podcast about how cool the U.S. Express is when you look at the entire scope of those two guys' careers. So,
oh, dude, and the lineage they have now.
Yeah. And you and I are both big Barry Windham fans. And I feel like this version of Barry Windham, I can probably count on one hand how many U.S. Express matches I've seen, especially like when you mix in like the 6-man tags and stuff. But he was awesome even here. Huge and just so adept at being a big man that can move and has a skill set in the ring.
Yeah, Barry Windham, definitely one of the most underrated of all time, in my opinion.
Yep. I'm glad there's not too much xenophobia in this match for the U.S. Express versus the Sheik and Volkov in 1985. I was actually pleasantly surprised by how this match went down. I was afraid it would be tough to watch, now.
I never understood why in WWF he was Mike Rotunda.
Right, no A.
And everywhere else he's Mike Rotunda. I don't understand. And I guess it's not really even that interesting. I love this finish, and I love Rotundo's confusion and concern for the just completely fucked up Barry Windham after the match. It's just, it's so excellent, and it seems so genuine where that could become super corny and campy. I think this is actually a great match that goes unrecognized in WrestleMania history.
Yeah, change of the belts. Sheik, a year removed from being World Heavyweight Champion, right? Barry Windham was on to be Horseman and the unfortunate bearer of 1,000 terrible gimmicks in WWE. But in WCW, it seemed to always just be himself, and it worked out just fine. Of course, Mike Rotunda being IRS, in line with DiBiase, and like just the careers that every one of these guys had, and just seeing a title change at a big event like this, super cool.
Andre the Giant versus Big John Studd in the $15,000 body slam match.
The gimmick matches, even from WrestleMania 1, there always has to be a gimmick match. This was my first exposure, I believe, to Andre as a face.
I didn't become obsessed with wrestling till 1990. I started dipping my feet into watching wrestling on TV, Wrestling Challenge and Superstars in 87. But before that, I just knew the cartoon. So I knew Andre as the face. He was the big goofy muscle in the cartoon. But I'd never watched matches. But they would show clips of matches on the cartoon. So we all know Andre is big. He is the Giant. Big John Studd is huge. Just a massive human. Andre doing the swinging choke thinking about that as a kid, of course, when he's choking Hogan, but he's choking Stud on the turnbuckles and just swing his head back and forth. And dude, I'm afraid now. Andre's been dead for 30 years almost, and I'm still afraid of him. Andre sells absolutely nothing in this match. Not one thing. And if you know the stories, he did not like Big John Studd.
Yeah, I do.
So he was just kind of like, he's going to stiff him the entire match. That cool bag after the body slam.
Oh, yeah, the little workout bag.
WWF duffel bag,
duffel bag.
Which I'm sure at this point, Zack Ryder's probably bought that for $15,000 even without the money in it.
That's another thing that's funny too. $15,000 in 1985.
$15,000 in 1985 is probably about $50,000 now.
Yep. I would take $15,000 right now.
And then after that completely unintelligible Andre interview, which is my favorite type of Andre interview, which is every Andre interview.
Yeah, pretty much the only kind of Andre.
So coming up next, oh my God, Leilani Kai and Wendy Richter for the WWF Ladies Championship. Leilani Kai is Dakota Kai's great-grandfather. Cyndi Lauper is hilarious. True Colors, Goonie ass. Also, 1985 looks like Paramore. Cyndi Lauper attacks Moolah, and there's so many people at ringside. No one's safe, and I just think it's sick. It's just 1985 to a T.
Girls just want to have fun, time after time.
Circle in the sand. Like I said, my first exposure to Moolah was the cartoons, where she was a cartoon.
And Mike Richter's sister, Wendy, winning the belt is...
But in my memory, I remember this match as being totally terrible, and the finish is botched. But in all actuality,
not that bad.
I thought this was a pretty good match. Yeah. It's funny because Wendy Richter was positioned to be essentially the woman equivalent to Hulk Hogan. And like I keep going back to the cartoon, she was close. Or as close as could be. It was Hogan, Wendy Richter, and Junkyard Dog. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way, but in my opinion, she had a great run in the same building that her brother won the Stanley Cup.
Stanley Cup, yep. Stopped all the shots. Stopped Pavel Bore on a breakaway. And then, Cyndi Lauper, a story of his own. All ties in.
All right, here it is. The main event of WrestleMania 1. Muhammad Ali's involved, and man, that's just fucking as cool as it gets. He was the Mike Tyson before Mike Tyson.
Joe Louis,
135 years old.
Wonderful.
The cast of characters in the hallway during Hogan's entrance is 80s New York City to a T. And if that's a deep cut for anybody listening, please go back and watch that because it's really, really fun. It's just completely insanity how ripped and shredded Orndorff was here. Real quick, I'm just going to run through the match. Piper hitting Hogan with that VIP 80s padded chair just fucking killed me. Just blasted him with a huge pillow. It doesn't matter because it's Roddy Piper and it's Hogan. It's still a chair, but it's just so funny. Referee Pat Patterson is more concerned with Ali, who is Mustafa's grandfather and Prince Ali's brother. Muhammad Ali the entire time is trying to get in the ring and fight everybody, and Patterson's flipping out. This match is essentially terrible, but man, I love it. It's such a fun 80s chaotic nonsense piece of business. Piper is the ultimate heel, so much so that he's even turning his back on Orndorff.
Oh, and destroys him at the Saturday Night's Main Event after. I just watched that. And knowing that he was that good of a heel, because I remember, he's a face, nice, Roddy Piper, making crazy jokes and half blackface and all that stuff. Like, knowing that he was a straight up devious heel at WrestleMania 1 on this stage. I heard about the Snuka coconut thing, and all that, but just being able to see it for the first time, it was mind-blowing to me.
Anybody who grew up 87 and afterwards only knows Piper as this amazing babyface. And he was actually such a great babyface that at that time, it is hard to imagine him as a heel at all, let alone the absolute best heel.
Right. That's what I'm trying to make. Yeah. Maybe in bad taste and a little loud, but still always a face for sure.
And, Piper, he even smashes Patterson on the way out and they take a powder and, big celebration in the ring. The promo after the match, Mr. T's promo just reminds me of my nephew rambling. Then Snuka makes no sense at all as well. And, he killed his girlfriend and he doesn't care and nobody else cares. And essentially there you have it. WrestleMania 1 is as 1985 as 1985 could possibly be.
Oh, yeah. And just height of Hogan's powers, too, just seeing that was the best. And just knowing that in 2002, that still getting ovations on Monday Night Raw. That I'd never seen that until recently. That match against The Rock, WrestleMania 18, just knowing that everything started in 1984, and when you're watching WrestleMania 1, that's when it's really all like ramped up, and how long he was able to sustain it. It's crazy.
So now I want you to pick what's your favorite scene of The Breakfast Club, your favorite song on Songs from the Big Chair, and your favorite match from WrestleMania 1.
All right, my favorite song from Tears for Fears, Song from the Big Chair, although we talked about the big three, Everybody Who Wants to Rule the World is definitely number one. I could tell you the number of times that I've listened to that song and it's like picked up my mood, or how I've wanted to emulate just how that song comes across. It's a perfect pop song, through and through. Man, favorite scene from The Breakfast Club? That's a really, really good question. I love the ending. I love when Brian is reading the finalized version of the letter out loud, the climax of the whole action, meaning them like separating, and then John Bender just raises that hand. It's the perfect ending to the perfect 80s movie. And my favorite match from WrestleMania 1, just because we were talking about Hogan, and I love Hulk, so that the main event is definitely my favorite match.
I'm going to go, my favorite scene of The Breakfast Club is when Bender really, really loses it. This is what happens when you spill paint in the garage. Yells at everybody, jumps up on the ledge, and makes that face like he grimaces in pain, because for some reason I always thought that meant he was farting. It makes absolutely no sense to think that, but that's what I thought, and I love it. My favorite song from the record, Head Over Heels. Jesus fucking Christ, man. This last time I listened to that song, when that opening piano comes in, I just lost my mind. And like I said, I blasted it so loud that I was alone. I was still embarrassed.
Moshing in your car.
Yeah. You know what? And this makes absolutely no sense. My favorite match from WrestleMania 1 is Andre the Giant versus Big John Studd. I don't even know why. There's just an intangible about it. And I just get so excited when Andre picks up gigantic Big John Studd and slams him.
A stipulation, man. It's always cool.
I wish I had some of that $15K, even without that 80s inflation. So this is the first episode of Thrashers, Slashers, and the Road to WrestleMania. John, thank you so much for being on it.
No, thanks for having me, man. You're the best.
You can catch John on Twitter and Instagram at xjohnnymorex. You could follow me on Twitter and Instagram at RickIsHell. And make sure you follow this podcast on all social media platforms. And I'll keep everyone updated on what those handles are in the future, because I've yet to create them. You could also keep up with my band at Extinction AD, as well as our brother show, Stiff Shots Podcast, at Stiff Shots Pod, which streams every single Friday. Next week, I'll be talking with Tom Wood, resident psycho and loyal pal, bass player of Extinction AD, This Is Hell, countless other bands. We're going to be talking about 1986, WrestleMania 2, Metallica Master of Puppets, and Sylvester Stallone's Cobra. Man, that is going to be fucked up. Also, smash that subscribe button on Spotify, SoundCloud, and Apple Pod. And as always, you know the drill, leave a 5-star review and shoot me a message so I can continue having some dumbass fun with everyone. Stay safe, lift weights, chug a Red Bull, bang your head, and never don't kick ass.